Hi, I'm Marissa Mitchell. I'm the speech coach at Castle High School, and this is Southwest Indiana Forensics Association Judges Training. This training is meant to serve in lieu of in-person training if you were unable to attend, or it's an opportunity to refresh yourself with details about meets and about the categories we judge prior to a meet. So let's talk about feelings first. I have a lot of parents and judges who are very, very nervous about judging. I'm going to go ahead and tell you that if you care about the kids, you're going to be a good judge. And most judges find judging to be very enjoyable and rewarding. You're going to get to see kids at their best, dressed to the nines, presenting intelligently and articulately. And if you're anything like me, you're going to have tremendous hope for the future after watching all of these kids perform. So today we're going to talk about basic procedures. I'm going to walk through some videos of different categories and show you a little bit of the nuances of judging each one. Then I'll cover some final thoughts. This presentation is meant to be used in conjunction with any judge's training manual that your coach provides, which will include details for every single category. A couple caveats today. Number one, I'm recording this in my classroom and the marching band shares a hallway with me. So periodically you might hear the soundtrack to my life, which is the Castle High School Band. The other thing I'm going to run into is when I'm showing you bits and pieces of videos from YouTube, there's a good chance that ads are going to periodically pop up. Please bear with me when we arrive at those situations. So basic procedures. The first thing you'll want to know is that the average meet is on a Saturday. We'll have a couple meets after school, but very few. Meets start very early, usually around 7 a.m. local time. And while most meets will be over by 4, and that includes an award ceremony, when we go out of town to Indianapolis, we will frequently have meets run until 7, 8, even 9 o'clock at night. Most meets are 3 to 4 rounds, and sometimes there are elimination rounds, quarterfinals, semifinals, or finals that allow us to narrow the field over time. And ultimately, your coaches are going to provide all the details about each meet when those meets arrive. When it comes to basic setup for your account to judge, you're going to need a wireless capable device for judging, and I would avoid a phone. I'd use a laptop or a tablet, something a little bit larger. And prior to your very first meet as a new judge, you'll receive an activation email from the tournament host via a site called SpeechWire. And this email will prompt you to set up a password to log into your account. There will also be a link to a tutorial on YouTube for you to watch so that you understand exactly how to use SpeechWire on your device. If for some reason you don't receive an activation email for your account by the night before your very first ever meet, please immediately notify your coach. What you'll want to bring with you to a meet: that wireless capable device, some scratch paper, preferably lined, a pen or pencil, and your cell phone, because your cell phone is going to be used as a timer. When you arrive at the meet, you'll typically meet the coach either in the school cafeteria where our teams normally meet or in the judges lounge, and your coach will give you those instructions. The day will start with a judges meeting where the coach who's running the tournament, as well as other coaches, will address you and give you some basics about what's unique about that particular meet. And then at that point, you'll be able to log into your account at SpeechWire, and that's where your ballots will post. Your ballots will tell you what room in the school you're going to be going to and what category you're going to be observing, as well as the names or the numbers or both of your competitors. You're not going to get all of these at once. You will get each new round after one round has ended. You'll want to pay very close attention to the judges meeting and ask your coach or any other coach questions if you're unsure about your assignment. And honestly, it's pretty frequent for newer judges to say, "Hey, I'm judging prose. I don't remember what that is. Can someone give me a quick refresher?" And we're very, very happy to do that. Sometimes you won't actually have an assignment for a round. If we have enough judges, frequently judges will get at least one round off. But please don't run away. Stick around, because sometimes if a judge doesn't show up or we've had another issue, we will on the fly assign a judge who was previously unassigned to a new round. Once you see that you have a round, you will be able to click Start Round, which tells us that you're ready to go and you're headed to your room. And then you get to go start your round, which is the most exciting part. When you are in that room, you are the adult in the room. Outside of sectional tournaments and state tournaments where there's more than one judge in your rounds, it's just going to be you. So the speakers will enter. Prior to their entry, you will make sure that the room is set up appropriately. You're going to be in classrooms, and all you really need is space in the front of the room for speakers to move around and have the fluidity to choose their positioning and pace if need be, because some categories can get pretty physical. You'll also want to make sure that you can see where the other speakers are going to be sitting on either side of you. So you will choose your seat before they ever walk in. As the kids walk in, you can check and make sure which ones have arrived based on your ballot. And ultimately, some students may arrive later. Several will be what's called double entered, where they are competing in more than one category, and they will strategically choose which category they need to attend first. So as the students, after the bulk of the students have arrived, you'll go ahead and start that round. You will follow the directions of the category, timing them as they speak in the order that's listed, unless they're double entered. And then you will have these ballots and a place to write comments, not just writing comments, but also ranking them. And again, more details will be available for you about this in your judge's manual. What I do personally is I take paper notes. I don't want to mess with my tablet and have my eyes be distracted. I can't type and watch them at the same time as easily as I can handwrite and watch the kids. So I'll just have my notebook paper out in front of me. I will observe the student. I'll be able to jot down general notes. And then after all of the speakers have spoken, that's when I input my comments. And that's also when I rank order them. There are no ties. You will rank them from 1 being the best to 6 or 7 potentially, depending on the size of your category, being the speaker that needs the most improvement. And that will all be done via SpeechWire on your device. A couple things to keep in mind in the room. Please make sure you are 100% focused on the speaker. We ask that you not be eating or drinking anything while you're evaluating students, that you silence notifications on your phone, that you not be playing on any kind of device. Your focus should be on jotting down some quick comments while you listen to them. You will want to make sure that every single speaker on your list has spoken before you leave the room. Typically, because of double entries, we allow up to an hour per round, which might mean that 4 speakers go, you dismiss them, and then you are still waiting on a couple to trickle in from previous categories. The only exceptions to these are extemp, impromptu, and discussion, and broadcasting, which have different rules, and I will talk you through what those look like here momentarily. After you have evaluated all the speakers, then you can go ahead and put those comments in and rank order your speakers. In terms of interacting with them, you should not give them any verbal feedback. All feedback that you're going to be providing will go into your ballot, and that will be very constructive and helpful feedback. Things like, please increase your pace, or I couldn't differentiate between the 2 characters, or fantastic delivery, your introduction needs a little bit more work, or memorization was good. Focus on differentiating your characters. Those are all helpful, constructive items of feedback. It's a lot harder for us as coaches to coach our kids when you say, nice voice, good job, tough round. And in the same way that you would hope that a judge would take the time to give constructive comments for the child you're representing, we ask that you do that for all of the kids. At the end of the round, you'll be able to submit your ballot, and then you will typically have a break between rounds. It may not be very long, but you will have a break. And then once again, you will see a ballot pop up when each round sends, and you'll repeat those steps. One other key note, at no time should you ever judge the speaker that you are representing. And frequently our judges are parents or relatives. You should not see that speaker walk into your room. If that speaker walks into your room, leave immediately and go notify the tournament manager, because we need to make sure you get reassigned. You should also never judge the category that that child you represent competes in. You may, however, see your child's friends in another category. You will very likely be evaluating speakers from your school, but never your own child and never that category. So speaking of categories, there are 14 of them, divided into 2 main subsets. The first being public address, which is what you think of typically when you think of giving speeches, and the second being interpretation, which is a lot more like acting. And I'm going to do a brief overview of all of these so that you have them. or at least have a general familiarity, once again, you should be provided with a judge's manual that gives you details that you can reference at any time during your judging experience. So let's start with discussion. Discussion is a unique category because all of your speakers are going to be speaking at once. A week prior to the meet, they're going to receive what we call artifacts, which might be news articles or songs or videos of pieces of art with no other guidance. And they have to do lots and lots of research so they know everything about those particular artifacts. If you as a judge are assigned to judge discussion, you will be given a copy of one of the artifacts as well as 5 or 6 questions about that artifact. And when you go into the room, all of your speakers will set the room up for you. They know how to do this. They will set their desks up in a semicircle facing you. And then you will ask a question, and then they will discuss that question until there is nothing more to discuss related to that question. Frequently, when you evaluate discussion, you're going to evaluate each speaker on items like relevant comments, like adding and building on to other speakers' comments, courtesy, because we don't want any one speaker dominating the conversation. And it's not a debate per se. We don't want them cutting each other off. They can disagree, but they should do so politely. Frequently in a room of discussion, you're going to see 2 very strong speakers, 1 to 2 speakers who struggle to find something to say, perhaps they're new, and then 2 in the middle. So it can be a little bit challenging to differentiate between number 1 and 2, 3 and 4, and 5 and 6, but that's when you can give them credit for specific items that they bring up or particularly thoughtful pieces of insight that they provide. It's also worth noting that speakers in discussion never get to double enter in another category, so they will only do discussion because discussion rounds can run up to 1 hour. Unfortunately, I don't have a video to show you for this one. United States and International Extemporaneous are 2 separate categories, but for brevity, I've grouped them because their rules are very similar. These are the social studies categories. These are your future attorneys at work, and they spend the whole year researching and keeping track of current events and news articles. Sometimes they'll use Word documents. Recently, they've been allowed to use the internet in their prep time, so they may not do as much of that. And they all have to have laptops with them. When they show up to meets, they are basically unaware of the topics that they're going to be given until they draw questions. They will each draw 3 questions in a prep room, and then they'll choose one to put together a speech for. They'll spend 30 minutes prepping a speech and rehearsing it so that they can deliver it to you by memory. And they have up to 7 minutes for that speech. They're allowed to double in anything other than discussion, broadcasting, and the other extemp. So let's look at an example here.
Sometimes in America, it becomes rather difficult to find insightful, unbiased opinions in our 24-hour news cycle. Fortunately for Americans, we can keep our TV tuned in a little bit later and rely on foreign policy experts like Jay Leno to provide some real insight. When it comes to President Barack Obama's nuclear policy, Mr. Leno explained that he has 1,000 warheads pointed at Russia, 1,000 pointed at China, and 1,000 pointed at India, with the remainder at Fox News. Now, while we find Fox News is not, in fact, America's greatest obstacle overcome, we do find that the rise of Eurasian geopolitics continues to create American declinists and put them in the position where they believe America might be falling compared to its Eurasian opponents. When it comes to China, Russia, and India, we find their strong growth has sent some signals through the international community. T.R. Fox, writing in his book, The United States...
Okay, so let's talk about that example. What you probably noticed is that, number 1, this kid was tremendously impressive. He is poised, he's articulate, he's confident, and he's very fluid in his speaking. The other thing he did a great job of was hooking your interest, including using a little bit of humor prior to introducing his thesis. A good extemper will be able to have what appears to be kind of like the introduction to an essay, where he or she hooks your interest and then creates a thesis with 2 to 3 key points, and then addresses all of those key points over the course of the speech, restates the thesis, and concludes with a similar attention-getting approach. Extemp speakers are also supposed to cite their sources as they speak. The idea is that they should not be making up any of the facts that they use. Impromptu is next. Impromptu is unique because you will only have one speaker in the room to start. No speakers who haven't yet spoken will be in your room. So if you're an impromptu judge, you will be given a sealed envelope at the beginning of your round. And a speaker will walk into your room and you will hand him or her that envelope so that he or she can look at the topic. That speaker then has a total of 7 minutes to prepare, memorize, and deliver a speech for you without notes. Frequently, a good speaker will take up to 2 minutes to prep and will speak for the rest of the 5 minutes. This speaker cannot double in broadcasting or discussion. One thing to note with both impromptu and extemporaneous speaking is that the speaker may ask you for hand signals to indicate how many minutes he or she has left in their prep and speaking time. And typically, if a speaker asks me for hand signals, I'll say, sure, what would you like? And the speaker will say something along the lines of, could you please give me 3, 2, 1, and 30 seconds? And as the speaker is telling you that, he or she will hold up 3 fingers, then 2 fingers, then 1 finger, and then what kind of looks like an American Sign Language letter C for the 30 seconds. Like extemporaneous, impromptu is about fluidity. And when you consider that that speaker has literally come up with a speech in front of you, it's pretty impressive.
You might have seen videos like this before.
Sorry.
Recently, there was an opening for the director of the local Kentucky Speech League position. And since no one could find a good candidate, I took it on behalf of myself to find the perfect candidate.
What that speaker is holding in his hand?
See, I'm fairly good at speech. I've done speech in the circuit for 3 years. I thought I'd make a great director. So I took the opportunity here at this tournament to try to convince each and every individual coach to vote for me as the next director. But they weren't exactly so open to the idea. I was met with questions like, how are you supposed to compete and run a tournament? And, oh my goodness, you're not joking, are you? But perhaps what this is, although they may not vote me in, is just a difference of opinion. One that we may actually be able to build into a stronger league and a stronger Kentucky. And perhaps that's exactly what today's quote is trying to say by Adriana Lord. It's not our differences that divide us. It's our inability to recognize, accept, and celebrate those differences. And what this quotation is trying to say is that if we can acknowledge our differences, we can make each other stronger. And we can see this through a variety of people throughout history. First, we can see this through quarterbacks Aaron Rodgers and Brett Favre. Secondly, we can see this through conqueror Alexander the Great. And finally...
Okay, and we'll pause that one there. So again, you will notice the fluidity, that pre-prepared hook, the direct address of the topic itself. One thing this speaker does a wonderful job with is hand gestures. He is very, very comfortable and his hand gestures are appropriate for what he's saying. The next category we'll look at is informative speaking. In informative, a speaker has written, memorized, and will present a 5 to 10 minute informative piece, typically including visual aids. It's not designed to be persuasive. It's designed to be more like a traditional presentation that a student might give in a class. A lot of these pieces that you're going to encounter that are pre-memorized are going to fall into this 5 to 10 minute category.
Thin Mints, Samoas, Tagalongs. These aren't just the names of the 3 most delicious cookies to ever grace our world. They're a way of life. For many of you, these wonderful treats are like Santa Claus. They come once a year, and they bring utter joy and jubilation to everyone they encounter. For me, these cookies are the foundation and backbone of an organization I've been a part of for several years now. The Girl Scouts. I'll be the first to admit that my fondness for being a Girl Scout didn't happen right away. You see, in the Girl Scouts, the various levels and labels that you acquire and aspire for. Everyone starts off as a daisy. What little girl doesn't want to be named after a pretty white flower? But the next level is where I had a problem. The next level in the Girl Scout hierarchy, brownies.
Okay, so something to keep in mind is that the examples that I'm showing you are national and state finalists. So these are going to be the best of the best. What this young lady does beautifully, in addition to her informative piece, which is wonderfully well written, is her visual aids are top notch. In fact, they're very interactive. The sash on that Girl Scout uniform, she actually removes it several times. There are different layers of it that reinforce points that she makes. She's used the humor related to race, and that's a good time to also bring up that sometimes speakers are going to touch on very sensitive topics. You will hear a lot about social justice issues. You may hear about personal trauma. You're going to hear some obscene language at times. There will be sexual content. And especially if you've come from the Catholic diocese circuit, you're going to see a huge leap in terms of the maturity of the pieces. If you find that a reference in a piece or the piece in general feels a little bit on the mature side for you or feels to you that it's inappropriate, please don't change how you rank the speaker. Feel free to make a comment in the ballot to that effect. For example, I've made a comment once in a student's speech, one that the student had written that indicated that I felt there was too much use of the F word. And that was kind of me editorializing something that I noticed because I didn't want it to be used against a speaker in the future. Ultimately, with all of these prepared categories, the coaches, in theory, know exactly what these kids are speaking, and the coaches have approved it. But we're very used to being around speakers and speaking. So if there's something that hasn't really registered to us as being potentially offensive or potentially resulting in some kind of bias against our speaker, it's helpful if you share that with us. But once again, please don't let that influence how you rank the speaker. Original oratory is similar to informative, but it's different from the perspective that this is designed to be entirely persuasive and speakers cannot use visual aids of any kind. However, the 5 to 10 minute presentation time is the same. One thing I get asked frequently, well, does the time really matter? Yes and no. In order for it to be a successful speech, it does need to fall in that 5 to 10 minute window. In the very early part of the season, we're a little bit more flexible if kids go over or under with our ranking. By January, they should be solidly within that window. The other thing that time range helps us with is differentiating between speakers who are in very, very close contention with each other. For example, it takes a lot more effort to maintain that composure and that fluidity for 10 minutes than it does for 5.5. So sometimes a longer speech may be the reason that one speaker gets a first and another gets a second if, at face value, their speeches are equally impressive. If one's had to work longer, I'll go ahead and give them the credit.
Beyonce once said the immortal words, "Who run the world? Girls." Well, I created a remix to Queen Bee, and my version of that song asks, who ruined the world? Men. Now, maybe that's an exaggeration, but it really feels like nowadays. Every time I go on Twitter and see one of my favorite male celebrities trending, it's bad news. You know, he's either A, a racist, B, a sexual predator, or C, racist and a sexual predator.
Okay. What's wonderful about this particular speaker is how natural it feels and how he feels like he's almost having a conversation with the audience. The other impressive thing about some of these speakers is by this point in a season, this student has been performing this speech probably for 9 months, and yet it doesn't feel over-rehearsed. It doesn't feel recited. He makes it feel new every time he delivers it. Once again, he's kind of taking a jab at, in this case, his own gender, and you're going to see things like that in these speeches. Broadcasting is another very unique category, particularly because, in theory, you should never see the speaker that is delivering the speech for you. In broadcasting, for most of the rounds, a speaker has been given some basics of news, weather, and a little bit of background on songs, and writes and presents a radio news show based on those artifacts. And that news show is supposed to hit the 5-minute mark as close as possible. There's no range, and that's part of what you're evaluating on. You're also evaluating the speaker on his or her voice, and only voice, because it's radio. You're not going to see facial expressions. There are 2 other types of rounds that speakers may perform in different meets. One is on the spot, where the speaker will be given an image or a brief description of some type of event, and then we'll have a few minutes to prep and then deliver to you as though he or she is on the spot at the scene of this particular event. There's also an editorial round at times where the speaker will be given a topic and will have half an hour to prepare an opinion piece. If that's the case, you will be alerted to that when you pick up that broadcasting round.
Chasing that A and
another ad. At least it's for Grammarly.
And welcome back. If you're just tuning in, this is All Things Considered on NPR, National Public Radio. I'm Alex Siegel, and now to the news. In recent news, thousands have marched for gathering in front of the Capitol on Washington for gun control. Marchers were led by Mayor Vincent Gray and other officials Saturday morning, and the crowd, which includes 100 residents of Newtown, Connecticut, along with buses of New York.
Okay. So sound effects are not required. That was just kind of something that this student put in his radio show. You'll notice that he varied his voice as though he were on the radio. And that's one of the biggest things that you will be evaluating on. Does this person sound like an effective radio DJ? If you're concerned about some of what has been cut in terms of news, feel free to make a note on the comments. You'll also notice that there will be an advertisement of some sort in that radio show, and the student has been given either the product or the company to advertise and has had to come up with that jingle entirely originally. Okay, moving on to our interpretation pieces, and almost all of these are going to be 5 to 10 minutes. The first category is prose. Prose speakers perform a prose piece, meaning it's mostly narration as opposed to dialogue. It does not have to be memorized. They will use a binder. Frequently, they will, by the end of the season, they will not be looking at their binders as often. The other thing to note about all of these categories in Interp where students can have binders is that binders can be used as props. Students aren't allowed to dress up for their pieces other than to wear dress clothes, and they're not allowed to use any kind of items for props unless they're in that informative speaking category. They also can't even use their clothing as props. The general rule is that if it is attached to your body and is a body part, you can use it to make a point. For example, flipping your hair. But if it's an article of clothing, you can't. So a student who's wearing a tie would still have to imitate adjusting a tie if that were part of his speech. Binders can be used for just about anything, whether it's sound effects or objects that the speaker wants to use to enhance their performance.
Well, it wasn't until 1965 that I knew I could sing. Well, I guess all black boys thought they could sing back in my day because we was all in that church choir come Sunday morning, whether we liked it or not. Not. But I believe the most important song I ever sung was on March 25th, 1965. A walk to remember, as many of us called it. Brothers and sisters, women and children, white men and black men, walking for freedom. Author Bonnie Sam writes, "It is our scars that remind us that we are healed, and our wounds that remind us that healing is yet to come. This idea that we are the sums of our lives' past experiences is reflected in the story of George, as he struggles to understand the pain and suffering that once was, and unfortunately still is, a byproduct of being African American. A Walk to Remember by Lee Sharon. I'll never...
Okay, a couple things I want to point out here with prose and with all of the Interp categories. Number one, Interp categories all involve an introduction, and typically a speaker will start his or her piece, give you a teaser, and then pause and step back into him or herself to give that introduction. So what you saw here is a very clear example of the brilliant characterization that this speaker has utilized for his narrator, and how that narrator sounds completely different than he does in real life. You will see speakers imitating narrators or characters of a variety of genders, races, ethnicity, ability. Sometimes you may have a speaker who is imitating a character who has a clear disability or handicap. That can make many of us feel uncomfortable. If a speaker is imitating a different race, or especially a handicap, we don't know how to feel about that. And here's the guiding principle. As long as the speaker is doing so in a respectful manner to bring that character to life, we think that's awesome. If you have concerns that that's not what's happening, that a particular race or religion or ethnicity or disability is being mocked in some way that is not kind, it's okay to go ahead and make a mention of that in the comments. Also noteworthy is not just voice, but facial expressions and body language, gestures are all critical in these Interp categories, and that's what you're evaluating those speakers on. Poetry. Poetry is where a speaker performs another one of those 5 to 10 minute presentations. In this case, he or she is blending multiple poems, incorporating a central theme, and making sure that each poem sounds unique. The speaker has typically chosen this topic, something that he or she is passionate about. And the poems could be anything from old school poems that we think of from poets who are long dead, to spoken word poetry, which has a little bit more of a hip hop feel.
I love cake. I can't be any clearer than that. I love cake. I could eat every cake in New York City. I can't even go into bakeries anymore. 'Cause I'll eat all the cake. I'll say, where's the cake? I love cake. Get me some cake. And they'll say, we know how much you love cake. We know that you rarely have enough money to buy our cake, so you can't come in here because you can't afford the cake. But you love the cake. So get out of here. You cannot have any of the cake. You don't have the money to buy any of our cake. I want cake.
Okay, so this speaker has put together a program called Fat Guy Poetry, and he incorporates all of these different poems. And interestingly enough, one of them, where it's got kind of like that, it almost sounds like a mobster accent, is not about actual cake. It's about a drug that is colloquially referred to as cake. So sometimes poems that seem unrelated on the surface can be incorporated to reinforce a point. And ultimately, his point is about discrimination against folks who are obese. Dramatic and humorous interpretation are two different categories with similar rules. They are also 5 to 10 minutes. In this case, both of these are memorized, which is different from both poetry and prose. They are memorized. Dramatic interpretation are serious pieces. Humorous interpretation are funny pieces. And in these categories, not only has the speaker memorized everything, but the speaker is playing every single character and trying to make each character unique.
Attention students, this is Mother Mary with some important announcements. In the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy, you know. I want to remind everyone that tomorrow begins our annual pagan baby adoption drive. Yeah.
Sister,
Rudy Pazinski.
what do you get when you freeze holy water?
Popsicles! You gotta remain after school to meet with Sister Clarissa. Okay.
Sister Clarissa. Sister Clarissa. Sister Clarissa?
Rudy Pazinski? How are you?
Okay, so you can get a very clear feel for how talented this student is in playing a variety of ages, a variety of genders, and this is only half of the characters that he plays over the course of his piece. Sometimes dramatic and humorous Interp pieces are individual pieces that coaches have helped students find. Sometimes also students are able to take a role from a movie and cut bits of that movie script to make the interpretation. So you may find you even recognize some of these as you hear them. Guiding principle for drama and humor: sometimes the drama pieces will make you cry, sometimes the humor pieces will make you laugh out loud. Keep in mind that you're really trying to focus on evaluating the student's ability to bring these pieces to life more than the piece itself. It's also okay to make a comment, and I've had to do this before. Student was very funny, but the piece doesn't feel right. Or maybe the piece features characters or a story that seems really, really old-fashioned, and the student could be better suited to a more current piece. Duo. This is the same category, just one, but students have the option of either being scripted, meaning they have binders or one has a binder, or being memorized. This is also a 5 to 10 minute category, and in this case, both speakers play all of the characters together. Here's the key. Unlike traditional acting, they cannot look at each other or interact with each other. So really good speakers will have choreographed this to such an extent that they will pass within inches of each other, that they will have rehearsed common movements, for example, a handshake, in such a way that you would barely be able to tell they weren't touching each other or looking at each other because they are so smooth on their timing. The piece that I'm about to show you is a little bit of it's a newer one. It's called 50 Shades of Chicken. It is kind of a spoof of 50 Shades of Grey. For those of you who are at least familiar with the premise of the book, you'll probably enjoy this one. What they're doing is they're panning their judges to make sure judges are ready.
I glance around the spotless kitchen. I don't even fit in. I share a shelf in the fridge with the ham so enormous, she's so much cooler than I am. Suddenly, the fridge door swings open, and I find myself falling. Instantly, I feel hands on me, lifting me up from the tile. My rescuer places me gently. On the countertop. He's young, handsome, and clearly works out. But it's his hands that have me mesmerized. I see a long knife rack filled with steel blades of all kinds.
You like my collection?
Extraordinary. Like an artist's tools.
I couldn't agree more.
For some reason, I find myself blushing.
Okay. So again, very impressive how they have choreographed all of those movements very carefully. It's not uncommon for you to see speakers move from being side by side to being back to front. I've even seen them flip over each other without touching each other. Acrobatics seem very common sometimes in duos, similar to Humorous Interp. Not required, and those, while they may make the performance more impressive, should not be part of what you evaluate. Programmed oral Interp is very similar to poetry, and this is another non-memorized category between 5 to 10 minutes. Like poetry, it's a blend of several pieces, only in this case, this is a blend of prose, poetry, and an interp piece or a script designed to demonstrate a common theme or make an argument.
If you are about to write a
after the ad.
So, I was invited to a party. Keep in mind, I don't really get invited to parties all that often, especially after coming out. You never know if people are gonna accept you or not. But there'll be a lot of cute boys there. For instance, the varsity football players, which just... So, of course I go, right? I remember wanting someone to save me. Each night, I curled up like a cold silkworm, just hoping my neighbors wouldn't close their windows again. Okay, so my first semester teaching, I went to all the seminars, learned all the warning signs, and man, was I on a lookout. Mind you, I knew the odds of me actually having a kid who'd shoot up the school were a drop in the ocean.
Okay, so in this poi piece, this speaker uses 3 different pieces that have nothing to do with each other to make a common point. His first piece, he's playing the character of a young man who is gay who's looking forward to a party. The second piece, he uses what sounds like almost a narration or a journal entry from someone who is very, very troubled. And the third piece is an overworked high school teacher. What they ultimately come together to make the point of is that teachers may be the first ones who can see that a student has been traumatized or has mental illness issues that might lead to a school shooting or some kind of terrible act against another student, because the way he cuts these pieces and weaves them together, that trouble student ends up killing the gay student, and that teacher character could have prevented it. So just so you kind of understand how these get woven together to make a point. The other thing this speaker does a wonderful job of is what we call bookwork, using that binder as a prop, where he uses it both as a mirror, as a journal, as a laptop computer. The final category is original performance, and this is a unique blend of, can be prose, poetry, interp, or duo pieces written and delivered by students. So when you are evaluating them, you might see a little bit of everything. It kind of feels like you are comparing apples and oranges at times, but what's most unique is that every single one of those pieces is written by the students performing them. So, a couple final thoughts. Number 1, preparation is key. Being on time for the judges meeting and having all of your materials will make all the difference in the world. Make sure you have a copy of your judges manual, and if you don't, find me or any other coach, because we probably have extras on us. Use those resources. You may be feeling very, very overwhelmed right now. I've given you a lot of information, and chances are you're going to forget half of it between now and your first meet. But again, that's what the manual is for. It's totally okay to have the manual open and to be looking at it and to reflect on that category before you actually judge. Please ask questions. We coaches are a friendly bunch, and we remember what it was like when we first got into speech. After your first meet, you're going to feel like a pro, but that first meet can be pretty scary. Talk to us about your concerns. Also talk to other judges who are veterans, and they can give you good pointers. Quality comments are critical. That is how we help our students become better speakers, and we see those comments before our kids do. So anything you can articulate in detail is very helpful. And finally, anxiety is so natural, and please don't let that be something that hampers your ability to enjoy this. I promise, after a couple meets, this will feel like second nature, and if you care enough to be there to support the kids, you're going to do a great job. Thank you so much for your time.